but you work for the Harford County Sheriff's Office. I would love to hear what inspired you to want to get into policing.
Sure. Well, I guess it started back in the late 70s, early 80s. When my brother lived in Maryland. I lived near Philadelphia. That's where I grew up. And I was in college then. And I came down to visit my brother and stayed actually for the summer and worked at one of the local malls. Of course, there's not too many malls around that are still functioning, but one of the malls that was close to my brother's house in Bel Air. And so it was in walking distance because, of course, college student didn't have a car back then. But he had been in law enforcement since the early 70s, but he was in the Army in Maryland at the Proving Ground
Okay.
for a little bit. And then
That's the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, right?
Aberdeen Proving Ground, yep. So he was there for a little bit, and then he joined the sheriff's office, Harford County Sheriff's Office, and he became a canine officer after several years on patrol. So when I came down that summer, it was actually 1978. Came down that summer, lived with him to make a little bit of money to go back to school to help pay for, tuition and stuff like that.
Right.
While I was down here, I was fortunate enough to be able to go out with him several times during his shift in the evening. So he worked 1 a.m. to 9 a.m.
Was this like a ride along?
Well, unofficially, yeah. So it was, I'll fast forward to like retirement. That was actually like the first, a lot of people didn't know that. So actually it was the first unofficial ride along program in the, for the 70s for the agency. But, I got to know, living, of course, at the house, he kept the dog there at the house. So the dog lived with him 24/7. So I got to know the dog that he had. He had several dogs, but, that year he had 2. So I got to know the dogs pretty good. So anyway, he would go to roll call at 12:45 in the morning. He said, "Hey, I'll swing by after roll call, after I gas up and stuff, like 1:15, 1:30. You can ride with me for, a couple hours, and I'll drop you off back at home." So he had the luxury a little bit of, like roving around, like he had an area that was assigned to him, but he could move around with the dog. But so I got to meet, see what he did. Got to see his passion for the work, and not necessarily back then I knew, hey, this is what I wanted to do. Actually, I went to Wilkes University for a business degree and really wanted to play baseball for a career. But I knew, business was what I wanted to get into somewhere down the road. Like I said, so I rode for him for the summer, got to know a lot of the business owners, because if there was a serious call that I couldn't go on, there was stipulations that he had, like, you got to stay in a car, do this, don't do that. But I got to know a lot of the business owners, because if we had a call that I couldn't go on, he'd dump me off at one of the 2 7-Elevens that were in the area. But it was neat because you got to know, like I say, you got to know the business owners, which later in my career, after I started, I already knew them.
And that's an important part of policing too, right? The community aspect, building relationships. That's highly what we do in law enforcement.
Right. And back then you had really good conversations. You talked to people that would come into the 7-Eleven. I got to know the regulars that would come in. So we would stop at the one 7-Eleven usually around 3:30 in the morning. Some of the guys would be there for coffee. You'd see the normal people coming and going to work at 4:00, and the owner knew everybody by their name. So I got to know some of those people. So, networking was a big thing too, like in your law enforcement career, not only the community part, but you network with a lot of the business people that either work in the area or are going to work. And you share different stories. And, I knew a couple of people that were worked for United Auto Workers. So I asked them about, well, what is it to be in a union? Because that was beneficial later when you're dealing with people, situations where there might be a dispute or union dispute in businesses that were in the county. You kind of understand what direction they're coming from. So everything that you learn through your career in life, whether biblical or layperson, there's a reason why you're learning that, and you can use that down the road. So I went back to school after that. Actually was offered a position at the local mall, that the store that I was working in, as an assistant manager.
Okay.
And I'm like, no, I'm going back to school. I want to finish my degree. Plus, I wanted to go back to play baseball. So fast forward, I graduate in 1981, and my mom and I were living. My dad died when I was younger. We were living near the Philadelphia area. Wasn't really near anywhere to commute, to go in the city or whatever. So I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm a graduate. I have, loans to start paying back in 3 months.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I know about those student loans. They can
Right.
put
I
you in
need to
debt for
work.
life.
I need to work. So he says, well, come back here, live for the summer, get a job, make some money, and then buy a car and then, move back home. So I'm like, okay. So I stayed for the summer, worked a couple jobs, was able to start collecting money, got a car. My brother's father-in-law used to get old cars and fix them up a little bit. So he sold me my first car was a 1968
Nice.
Chevy Impala 408, and it sucked gas. So days it rained, I took it to work, and days it was nice, I walked. It was only like a 10 or 15-minute walk. But that was my first car, and I paid him, every week. Paid him like $70 a week, and got it paid off. And so towards the end of the summer, I started, looking for jobs. Back then in the newspaper, it's not on computer anymore. It's in newspaper, and
You see, Joe,
what?
we're dating ourselves talking about the newspaper. These kids nowadays, they don't know anything about that, right?
Right, right, right. So basically, I never did go home after that. I stayed. Um, the place that I was working at was it was called Montgomery Wards. It was a retail, but they also had like a paint and hardware department. So that's where I was working. News store and opened up at the end of the mall, which was Heck Company, which is a clothing retail, but they were looking for security people. So I'm
Okay.
like, So again, there that summer, so 2 years later, I'm riding again unofficially, a ride along program. And it started getting in my blood then because again, I like the type of work. I'm not one that likes to sit in an office. You're what you need to do for your job. You go out and do your job. Um, and just like things just start falling into place. And then with the security position,
You
and
know, Joe, not
then
to cut you off,
yeah,
but this
go
is
ahead.
what I hear a lot from people, right? Well, there was some type of passion. Their blood was boiling, as you describe it, wanting to get into a career, whether it be security or law enforcement. So it's like something that's inside of our gut that really
Right,
makes us want to help people.
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's more of a serve your community, because and I guess it kind of started when I was 12, when my dad died. I had a lot of the neighbors, including like our family, but like a lot of the neighbors poured into me to like get me to baseball and checked on us and see how we were doing. There was that community there, which you talk about community service now. Again, not knowing like that's what was happening.
Right.
So I guess that kind of really started the ball rolling, but then seeing the type of work and being able to not only give back to the community, but to help people. That's part of servanthood is helping others that are in need. And again, seeing on the calls for service that he was going on and the type of work he was doing, and actually the other guys too, because like I said, he was in K9 and he handled certain calls, but there was other things that he had to do to stay free because of having the dog. But just talking to some of the other guys and their stories is like this is something that like I can do.
Sure. So before you
Um,
became a sheriff's deputy, going back to the calls
yeah.
that you went on, was there one specific call that really said, you know what, I'm going to do this? You want to help people, you want to be that servant in the community. Was there one particular call that ignited that passion for you?
No, I just think it was a combination of seeing the examples that were out there of not only my brother, but and not that I wanted to do the job because he was doing it.
Right.
Just seeing the example of other people around him, their passion and why they were doing it, just hearing the different stories of, there's wins and losses and everything. And
Mhm.
just hearing like, had they not been at a, like, say, a cardiac arrest, or had they not been in a domestic in time to break it up, but only also to give those people solutions to handle the problems versus just, some people out there think, oh, the police are out there just to arrest people. No, it's
Sure.
to help. It's to give solutions to get them out of that. Does everybody take that advice? No, no. But like again, trying to help them with their problems or help them solve the problems on their own, but just giving them certain resources or information to help them do that. And then to see those that partake in that and are able to get it out of their circumstances to like, and again, it's not patting yourself on the back, but being a Christian, that's helps them grow in their walk, or just like you feel that, hey, this is why I'm here. God has given me this purpose. And again, not that you're patting yourself on the back, but that's a win for God because those people are in a different situation. So yeah, not one, but like culmination of
Sure.
everything.
No, I love what you said. And going back to some of the service calls that you've seen, I know when I was a cop, uh, a particular call are domestic violence calls. Those could be really tragic and emotionally devastating for not only the families, young children, but also the police officer themselves. And for many who do not know, when cops respond to those type of service calls, it could be extremely dangerous because you never know what you're going to face. And sometimes
Absolutely.
that couple turns on the officer and attacks them for being there. So just wanted to also say that. But I love your passion. I love your story, hearing about it. What was a typical day like after you became a sheriff's deputy? Can you maybe describe that process from day to day after, there's thousands of police agencies in the United States and they all do something differently. But can you maybe talk about your daily functions as a sheriff's deputy back then?
Okay. Yeah. So we typically, and I know it's different now because stay in contact with a lot of guys. Typically, we would have roll call for about 15 minutes prior to. So I was fortunate to get my choice of shifts after I graduated the academy after 16 weeks, and I got the midnight shift. And our county was broken up into different what they called areas, now sectors, but different areas of the county. So it's broke up into different portions. And so typically we would get to work 15 minutes prior to our shift. So we called it a midnight shift, but it's actually 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning.
Okay.
So we would be there 15 minutes before and start roll call. And the supervisors then would go over particular incidents that maybe occurred the shift before, or particular things that were of importance to pay attention to generally or in your area. So, if you were working, like the area I started was called Upper West. So it was the Upper West part of the county. If I was working that area, I would take notes to make sure I knew, okay, this business had no alarm, so I need to check that a couple times during the night. Or this place had a robbery last night or a burglary. So I would pay particular attention to those notes that were relayed to us. And then we had like a run sheet, so we'd have information on the sheet too. So I would make sure. So typically we come in, have a roll call. Most of us would gas up our cars prior to roll call, so that's why you kind of got there ahead of time.
Well, you don't
So
want to
we
run
would,
out of gas during the
yeah,
shift.
you
I've
don't
been
run
there.
a gas in the middle shift, and there was only one or two places to fill up back when I started in the early '80s. So you had to make sure, yeah, you had plenty of gas for the night, and you checked your car. So I shared a car with two other guys. So every shift that car ran. So that car ran 24/7. So if that officer, my partner from the previous shift was in, we all had specific jobs. So typically, the shift would fill up gas. I would check my flares after roll call, make sure I had enough supplies in there, medical supplies, make sure the first aid kit's up to date.
Yep.
And then I would go out to my area and start patrolling. So again, checking those specific areas if there were certain things based off a roll call. Back then we had a thing called home checks, which if a person was on vacation, we had a little book and it'd say, 123 Main Street in Jarrettsville, those people are away from this day to this day. And you would go by and you would park in a driveway and you'd walk around their house, make sure it wasn't broken into, no broken windows, had little notes on the thing. And then you would note on the back the date and the time that you were there, check the house. That way, if the next shift came on and they found house broken into, you can kind of help criminal investigation division. Okay, happened between this particular time, and then so we would do that. I would do some traffic in there, make some traffic stops,
And
answer
this is
my
the
call.
part that you don't necessarily see on television. It's all
Right, Right.
mundane, routine, service checks. You have to check a
Right.
vehicle, make sure the first aid kit is supplied,
Yeah.
all these things that officers have to pay attention to, extreme detail. So just hearing you discuss this, it reminds me of my career as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, the community policing part. So the area I worked only had one business that was pretty much open. Like the central area was the 7-Eleven. So, you go by there a couple times because, again, the community policing type thing.
What's your favorite
Um,
coffee, Joe? Speaking of 7-Eleven, that's the only store
uh,
that
I
stayed open 24
don't
hours
like
down in
7-Eleven
Baltimore.
coffee. I actually didn't start drinking, believe it or not, I didn't actually start drinking coffee until like 2004 when my daughter went to college. So I was
Oh,
almost
wow.
done my career. I would always drink either like hot chocolate or hot tea. I really didn't like the taste of coffee back then, but those cold nights you had to have something hot.
Yeah, that
So
coffee could be
I'm an
pretty
iced tea
rancid
drinker.
too.
Yeah, I'm an iced tea drinker, so
Okay.
um, I would do that, in nice days or whatever. But so yeah, so you'd hand your sometimes in the area I worked, it was a lot of farm country, so it wasn't a ton of businesses. I mean, it had different like pockets of area that I would go to, but I also had to be mindful of the other deputies that I was backing up in those areas close to me might be 30 to 35-minute drive on a normal speed limit. So I had to be mindful of where I was going in case they got a call for service that was more intense or a hot call like a domestic or fight. I had to make sure I had to do my job and check those specific areas, but I also had to be mindful where I was in case they needed help and vice versa. So
So
sometimes, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off. I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
actually going to piggyback on what you just said.
yeah.
Was there ever a difficult time throughout your service career where you had to make a life or death, decision being a sheriff's deputy? Just wanted to know that.
Yeah, yeah. You learn to talk. You learn to sometimes talk your way out of situations or prolong the time to allow your backup to get there. I can remember a time I had made a car stop in the middle of the night, and it was on a suspected drunk driver.
Mm,
And when I pulled the gentleman out of the car, actually we started having conversation, got him out of the car. There was a gun in the car. So getting him away from that situation, he was not very cooperative. He wasn't irate and fighting, but he was not very cooperative. So we kind of
sure.
had some heated conversations.
Mhm.
And again, back then, compared to police now, we did not have radios on our lapel. So our only form of communications was in the car. So,
Wow.
when you're calling out the information on the stop, but then who knows if everybody else heard it? Who knows if the other deputy started that way just in case you needed help? So I gone back to the car, radioed that, I needed a backup. And that was only 2 weeks out on the road by myself. So,
Yeah,
right
that
along
can
for
be pretty dangerous back
yeah,
then.
yeah,
If you didn't
yeah,
have a radio on your lapel where you could key
yeah,
up and call for help, you had to
right.
go inside of the vehicle
You had to go
to
back into your car to the car radio to call in,
wow.
information. And we had a system back then. It was called the relay system that was built into the car,
Mhm,
and it was built into your the horn. So if there was an emergency call, say you were out on a call already, or they couldn't get a hold of you,
mhm.
they would hit a numerical system as related to your car number, and it would actually set your horn off of your car.
Gee
So that
whiz.
was that was telling you, hey, say you're out, I'm out on that car stop, and they're trying to get a hold of me, and they can't get a hold of me. Then they would call the other unit and say, hey, look, we're trying to get a hold of my ID number is 152. We're trying to get a hold of 152. That guy would start that way, but again, they call. But if I'm out dealing with somebody that's giving me a hard time until I can get back to the car, then they would set the horn off after so many times of trying to get a hold of you. So it was good and bad because they're like, hey, we need you. And they're checking up on you. But like you could be out in the middle of something and you don't need help, or say you're out on a burglary and you're checking a house, and all of a sudden they can't get a hold of you and they blow your horn, then it, alerts other people around there. Or if you're doing field sobriety testing between your car and the other driver's car and the horn goes off, it kind of like startles you,
It
so
reminds me of a system back in the early 1900s. My goodness. Just imagine doing a traffic stop and the suspect gets out the vehicle and starts shooting. You don't have time to run back to your
right.
car. So
Yeah.
thank God for modern day technology, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And then, it's interesting because as you progress in technology, there's little bugs that are usually with that in the beginning until it all gets worked out. And then, people that start D-Days, I mean, like, why don't we have this? Why don't we have that? And you try to explain the system that we used to have. And they're like, real, and like you're saying, really? You like didn't have, yeah, you had to know, again, you had to know how to talk to people. Um,
Which is a part of policing as
which
well.
is
And
part
we
of
have to
policing.
do something called verbal judo, right? You
Right,
use the
right,
power of your words.
right.
At times, that's the only tool that you may have available to
Exactly.
de-escalate a hostile suspect.
Right.
And on the show, we talk about that a lot. Aggressive individuals. Not everyone complies with the law, unfortunately. And there
Exactly.
are police fighters out there who will try to take your life. Absolutely.
Right. And being a Christian, I don't say it's easier, but like I became a Christian right after I started the academy. So again, it was new for me, but again, learning the verbal judo, but then you're in situations where you use your training from the academy, but then the unofficial rider along program that I was on with my brother twice, that was a benefit to me because I got to see how on the calls how the different guys talk to
Sure.
people, whether they were a witness, a suspect, just community policing, how they talk to them. So that was a benefit for me. And then using the Christian faith is treating everybody, even though you don't necessarily agree with what they did or they did something wrong, treating everybody like a child of God and
Mm,
actually having a conversation versus a confrontation with somebody. And this
yes.
is one of the things that I teach in the class that I have, that I teach at the college is conversation versus confrontation when you're interviewing or interrogating or whatever. Is like if you treat the person, you talk to them as a brother or whatever, it tends to go a lot easier, again, a lot better because you're treating them as a person. Um, Even if they're ignorant with you or irate or loud, again, that de-escalates without them even knowing you're doing that.
Sure.
And again, you understand, hey, they messed up if they committed a crime or they're drunk, and maybe you're not going to have a great conversation with them. But if you treat everybody the same way, there's no, well, you didn't treat me fairly, or you talked to me like this. And the administration, your people that you work with, see what your countenance is. And I've had a lot of conversations with guys and girls that I've worked with is like how do you talk to people like that? What what it so they see your actions, and then it opens the door for having conversations about your faith.
And that's what it's about. I love what you just said about conversations. I can remember one incident being down in the city, and this gentleman, he frequented the area, but one day he told me he felt, homicidal and suicidal, but he needed psychiatric services, and that, of
Mhm.
course, was provided. But I could always remember pulling him to the side, getting him away from the crowd, and talking to him about the love of Jesus Christ. And you just see his facial expression change dramatically.
Right,
Like I was paying attention to what he was saying. I was absolutely being intentional with his words.
right.
And that's something that I commend you for doing, no doubt about it.
Yeah, a lot of times, like back then and even today, police officers, especially if you're working a busy area, they just want to go from call to call. And again, same thing in class. It's like if you spend that extra 5 minutes with the person, again, unless you have a call, signal 13 where you're, shots fired or whatever, where you can't stay. But a lot of people just want to go to the call, get the information, write the report, and they're at, go get their information, and they're out there and like move on to the next thing.
And
But
for my listening audience, not to cut you off,
yeah,
Joe, you
yeah,
mentioned Signal 13. Just want to clarify what that is.
mhm,
That's pretty much a police code. Officers in trouble. We need
right.
help. Send backup right away.
Right. Yeah. But spending that extra 5 minutes with that person, to actually listen, and not do all the talking. And again, A lot of situations can be solved and worked through if you actually listen to what the problem is. And again, spending that extra 5 or 10 minutes on that call for service to help them, instead of going back week after week after week with the same issue. If you do spend the time, you see that person actually, and including them in the solution, let them be the solution.
Sure.
Um, and when they have the power to do that, again, giving them advice, talking, hey, here are some options. What do you think about that? And them talking you through it. The success rate in that is so much higher. And again, you're treating them as a person and including them in it.
And that's
And
why I think a lot of the veterans, the old school cops, love to be assigned to the same beat because the community gets to know who they are, right? People are
right,
always sizing up police officers, and you may get a very young, impressionable officer out the academy who may not understand how to use the
right,
power of communication and
right,
verbal judo. We've all
right,
been there, right?
right,
So I just
right.
want to transition a little bit, Joe. You
Yeah.
said something before that was pretty interesting, going back to your ride along stories, but we're talking a lot about the downside of policing, and I know it can be a depressing conversation for some.
Mhm.
But was there anything that you actually enjoyed? Was there a specific event or incident that was quite memorable to you? I know I'm asking you to jog back
Mhm.
30 years of your
Yeah.
career, but you have a lot of kids out there who may be listening and inspired to become a police officer. And I don't want to just tell them the bad stories, but also
Yeah.
shed the
Yeah.
good light.
Yeah. Well, we did. One of the things that I enjoyed doing is we formed with actually Cal Ripken years ago. Uh, Gosh, let me think. It probably
You mean
was
Cal Ripken, the baseball player?
probably the baseball player, Cal Ripken
Okay.
Jr. Um, started a foundation called Badges for Baseball,
Hmm.
and it was a summer program, and it ran 8 weeks, and it started probably like the early 2000s. Um, and it was with like the Boys and Girls Club. So there's a lot of organizations out there, but the Boys and Girls Club had summer camps at different areas. And our agency teamed up with Badges for Baseball to teach boys and girls the sport of baseball and the different. So we do different drills and we do different. Um, we'd have games, so we'd do some
Hmm.
practice and teach them different things. But then, so Cal Ripken Jr. and their foundation would provide a lot of the equipment.
Oh, wow.
Uh, so we would have like gloves and bats and balls and stuff like that if the kids didn't have them,
Which was right up your alley because
which
you
was
are a baseball
right up
fan.
our
You enjoy
alley.
coaching.
And
Sure.
yeah, yeah. And so this other gentleman, Steve Thomas, who I was good friends with, we played softball together for the sheriff's office. He was the head person, and I helped him. But it was neat because you gave back to the community, but the students during the summer program could see that the police were friendly. They were in a different light. They were actually human, and you got to build relationships up with the kids. And it was from age 8 to 14, I believe it was
Oh,
eight
so they were
to
pretty
15.
young.
So they were pretty young, but we had them in different groups. So
Mhm.
and it was different. It wasn't just the two of us. It was different people from the agency that would volunteer, and you knew what the schedule was. And if you were off and you wanted to come spend 2 3 hours, but then it also went into, once we were done the baseball part, they would have lunch was provided for them
Okay,
by
that's cool.
different community organizations. So we would sit down with them during lunch, and you would learn about their situations and what they were dealing with. And some were good family situations, and other were bad family situations.
Sure.
And you would talk through them, and it was kind of neat because um, they're kind of intimidated when you first are there. Oh, the police are, it's like, but like we didn't wear
They don't know what to
uniform.
expect. I mean, they're
Right.
kids, right?
We didn't wear uniform. We wore, shorts or sweatpants, and we had a shirt that Calvert can help design and stuff like that. So like they knew like we were in charge. But like while you're sitting there having lunch with them, a couple different kids that I was talking to, like, oh, well, we're fatherless, and my mom's working
Mhm.
3 jobs, and
Right.
I'm able to come to this, and she's able to drop me off, or my neighbor brings me here, or the different organizations where they're at, the different community organizations bring them there. So it's not just the Boys and Girls Club, it was other organizations that was in the county that would bring the kids there. And, we started out like 30 or 40 the first year. And I
Oh,
did it for
wow.
4 or 5 years until I got promoted. So I had a hard time, adjusting schedules and stuff. But we were up probably over 75 to 100, kids that were there. And again, you learn and you're able to share different things with them. You had to be careful about your faith at that particular time, but like you could say, hey, this is why I do this, because the Lord's in my life. And if they start a conversation after that, okay. But I was able to share with a couple kids, like, yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from.
Right.
My dad died when I was 12, you're 8 and you're 10. Like, these are things that I dealt with. I dealt with some anger issues and like, why my dad, and, why don't I have a dad and stuff like that. So I was able to share some stuff with them. And, I was still, that area that I did the badges for baseball was most of my career. I worked that area. So out of the 30 years, I probably worked 24 out of the 30 years in the lower end of the county, where there was a lot of, single mothers, Section 8,
Sure.
low income housing and stuff like that. So I got to see the kids in my patrol area. Even as a supervisor, I would go out, 1 or 2 days a week and patrol with the guys and girls at work to stay in, connection with my subordinates and people I work with. But I also see people in the community. And then, periodically there'd be kids that were in the badges for baseball that grew up and they'd come to the precinct because they got in trouble. But I was able to have a conversation with them. It's like, what happened with this particular thing? Well, I'm hanging around with some new friends, and like, okay, so what did that get you? So it
Right.
was kind of like them knowing you, that you could actually have a conversation, not looking down on them. And
You
again,
treated
kind of
them like
like,
a human being, and that's
yeah,
what
yeah,
kids want. They wanna
yeah,
see that superhero that they look up to, and
right,
sometimes police get that bad rap. And
right.
this was going back to the '80s, or was it the '90s? I missed that part.
This one, the badges for baseball was like early 2000s.
Oh, early
So it was like,
2000s. Okay, I'm off.
yeah, like late 90s, early 2000s, and it still goes on
Yeah,
till today. It's still going on. But yeah, so it's I actually have one kid. You were talking about stories. I had one neighbor where I was living, that lived 3 doors down. We were living in a group of townhouses, and one day his mom comes down,
mm,
and he was like 10 or 11, had gone off, was hitting his sister, and like, just like out of hand. And
right.
like, I never saw it out of him because our kids used to play together in the common area of the townhouse community. So like, literally I had to sit on him physically, and I had a hard time. And like, I was, 5'11", 165, and here he's, maybe 80 pounds or whatever, but like, he just like had this rage in him, and we didn't understand.
Yeah,
Literally had to sit on him for like an hour until his dad came home. And but we talked through some stuff, and like, we played together and we did stuff, and they come knocking on the door, hey, can Mr. Joe come out and play? So my wife would say, oh, he's in bed sleeping, he works. I say, but just out of those situations and having conversations with him and just being human, he actually became a police officer at the sheriff's office.
wow. I
And
love the
he,
fact that you humanized the badge and that opportunity
yeah,
to the point
yeah,
where he actually became a sheriff's deputy. That is amazing, Joe.
yeah, yeah. And he said to his parents, his mom and dad said, well, he became a sheriff because he saw what you did. You talked to him, you treated him during that one time, but like, you were out there having fun with them, and saw him like, hey, this is something I could see myself doing. So, I went to they invited me to the graduation, and went to the graduation and stuff. And he worked for me actually for about 6 months when I was a sergeant on one of the shifts, and he's still there now. He's close to like the 20-year time period. He's doing really good. He was involved in like 2 or 3 years in, he was involved in a shooting situation. And,
Mm,
I wasn't on call then, but I went, to the crime scene, and,
sure.
we had some conversations about it, and we worked through some stuff. And, yeah, so Again,
I love what you just said. Many times, police officers, based on my experience anyway, become the surrogate parent at times when these kids don't have any role models to look up to. They
right,
see us every day during the shift, right? I can
right,
remember one time down working in the city. I got out of my patrol car and I saw the kids were playing football and I decided to
yeah,
join them. And
yeah, yeah,
the relationship element that I built was absolutely incredible. So kudos
right,
to you for being that community type of cop. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah.
So I just want to transition a little bit, Joe. Right now, we live in a very tense culture with police and the citizens, unfortunately. And I want your thoughts as a veteran police officer. Why do you think so many cops are leaving the job today?
I think it's probably a combination of frustration,
Mhm.
um, of how they're being treated and the stereotyping that's put on them. Um, Again, depends on the agency, depends on the area you're working, what state you're working. Again, whether it's the government, pulling funding, or they've just had enough of the nonsense. Like, why am I doing this? They love the job, but like if they're not getting any backing um, in the job that they're doing, and they're on trial for everything,
Yeah.
I think they're thinking of their families and situations that um, I'm putting my life on the line, but this is how I'm being treated.
Hmm.
Is it really worth it? Um, and a lot have stayed, a lot have gone, a lot I'm sure have been close to retirement. It's like, look, I can retire next year. I'm done. I'm out of here. Let the younger person do it. But again, a lot of agencies, and I know the sheriff's office here where I used to work, a lot of agencies are having a hard time hiring people. It's all across the country because of the defunding, budgets being pulled, they're not being trained fully to capacity that would allow them to do the job. Um, it could be some stuff within the agencies of their
There are many
administration
reasons.
or the local.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's many reasons. I don't think you could put your finger on one. Um, I think some are burnt out because people have left the job and now they're working so much overtime that like they have no family life, and so it's, yeah.
And
I
I've
don't
been
think you
there,
could put.
just to be fair. I mean, to be
Yeah,
fair, I've been there before as a former cop where it got to the point in my career I no longer wanted to do the job,
yeah,
whether it be because I was stressed and burnt out,
mhm,
running call to call, seeing the emotional trauma that comes along with policing. And because
mhm,
I was not managing my own stress and mental health, it took a toll on me. But thankfully,
right,
I had some really good people in my corner to provide me
mhm,
with the help that I need. It was a critical component. So what you said is absolutely true. Many cops become cynical. I think
right,
it's a national
yep,
phenomenon, is not limited necessarily to one agency.
right, right. And like you said, to jump on what you said is about,
Mhm.
um, I always try to find, and we always had a group of Christian brothers and sisters that were at the office that we would constantly, that would be our support, not only our families,
Mhm.
but that was our support. So if we were struggling with something, a group of us would sit down and talk together. I worked out with 3 or 4 guys all the time, a couple days a week, and we would work out, but we'd also talk about our faith, and or like there was a call for service and like, hey, we went on a shooting or we were involved in this or we were involved in that. Like, we had that support system, which made it easier. A lot of guys and girls out there now think that they could do it on their own, and they
Can't
can't.
do it
And
on
that's
your
where
own.
this right, and that's where the stress builds up, or they don't want to go to talk to somebody, that the agency has, like an employee assistance program, because like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be tough and like I can do it on my own. You can't. Um,
And
you can't.
unfortunately, as
Right,
cops, we're very prideful people at
right,
times. We don't
right,
want to seek out
right,
and get help because, again, going back to the scrutiny from our command staff and feeling that we're going to be singled out or
right,
possibly lose our jobs or get a psych
right.
eval, whichever
Yeah,
one comes
yeah,
first.
yeah,
So I understand that sentiment from some officers. Unfortunately, I would encourage any police officer listening
yeah.
to this podcast to seek help. If you are struggling with mental health, experiencing a crisis, it's starting to interfere with your life, your children, your wife, your spouse,
Right,
please, by all means, take the advice of uh, Joe and myself to get help. There's nothing wrong with that. No
Right.
shame, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, just transitioning a little bit. I know you're a person of faith. Obviously, you are a coworker of mine. We teach together at a Bible institution, and since I've been there, it's been absolutely phenomenal. The impact that I was able to have on the students and yourself as well. I've tagged along during some trainings. I've seen you in action. So maybe describe that process a little bit for my listeners. What is it like being a college professor dealing with 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are interested in law enforcement? And I also want to say that this before you answer that question,
Yeah.
you also served as an assistant baseball coach. So you're coming at this thing from so many different elements,
Right.
so
Right.
many angles. Hey, I want to
Yeah.
know. Please let me know how this is all done.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because I actually came to the college originally, um, interviewed as the head coach. So I was coaching a collegiate team during the summer of 17 and 18. In 2018, the
Mm.
athletic director at the college called and said, "Hey, our coach left. Would you be interested in, I don't know where you're at in life. I know you're retired. What would your interest be?" So had a conversation with that. Actually came into the college. We talked about it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into coaching besides just baseball. There's a lot of administrative stuff. There's a lot of grounds work stuff, and
It's
being
not just
being
about hitting home runs.
it's
Come
not
on, what?
it's not about hitting home runs and talking to kids and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff, and so being retired. One, I wasn't going to do that to my wife, and I wasn't going to do that to me after 30 years of law enforcement. So I'm about an hour away from the college. So I took in consideration the travel, and you know, it is a full-time plus job to coach. So
No doubt.
I actually became the assistant coach, talked to the athletic director, and so while I was there, I knew that the criminal justice program had just started like a year or two before. So I made arrangements to talk to Dr. Churchville, who is there at the criminal justice program, and happened to arrange while I was there for the interview for the baseball thing. Is like, hey, can I arrange talking to Dr. Churchville
Yeah,
about
he's a
what?
wonderful guy.
Oh
Heart of
yeah,
gold.
oh yeah, what it would be like sometime in the future to maybe do it be a guest speaker, or like where is the program going? So we had a good 45, 50-minute conversation. Um, so that was in like beginning of August of 2018. So in September, he emailed me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing a guest speaking, um, like an hour or 45 minutes?" I split it with a sergeant from Lancaster City Police and came up, and 17 kids in class, and I
Oh
talked
wow.
about what it is to be like in a specialty unit, in the training, to be on the SWAT team, because I was on the SWAT team for like 16 years, and like how does that play into your job? And so we talked about that and prepping, and how the schooling and the Christian faith build into all that.
If you don't
Um,
mind me just interrupting
yeah,
briefly, Joe, I want to go back to a special word that many police tend to not get into, right? That's specialized units, the SWAT
right.
team, and we always see it on television. I want to know a little bit more. I'll let you continue your story,
Yeah,
but I want to
yeah,
know more about your specialized training, especially with the SWAT team, because that seems to be a very popular avenue to pursue in law enforcement. It attracts a
right,
lot of youth.
right. Yeah, so in order to get on the team, you basically have to compete. So you do a physical fitness test, and you have to pass a physical fitness test that the agency has, and it's like running, climbing walls, dragging a person, carrying a person on your back a certain
Wow.
distance. So you have to physically be able to do that because you're wearing gear, and the gear could be anywhere from 20 to 35 pounds depending on what you have on.
Wow.
The different body armor, helmet. So it does tax your body, even if you're just standing there with all that gear on for an hour or two at a traffic post. So you're there, in a situation where you're watching house. I mean, that wears on you physically.
Definitely.
Um, so yeah, so you go through that, and then you're competing against other people. When I first started that, I was on what they call the tactical team. So it was a group of 25 people in the agency. that was basically the outer perimeter or a traffic post of a situation. So it wasn't the team that actually would like break down the door and go in, or wasn't a hostage negotiating. So I was on the outer part for about 6 months on the tactical team. Once you get on what we called the entry team, which is now called special response team, once you get on the entry team, you actually go to a 2-week school that's each day is at least 10 to 12 hours. And it teaches you different aspects of making an entry to a house. A lot of officer survival stuff. And you had to pass that and get certified and receive your certificate of that training. And like, if you can't meet the firearms qualifications, if you can't do the specific tasks that's required by the training commission and that organization that's putting that, then you don't get certified.
So it
So you're
sounds
not.
pretty rigorous to
Oh
me.
yeah, it is like
A lot of mental
physically,
toughness,
like
for sure.
every day it's like, again, wearing the equipment and doing stuff that you have not done before in a regular uniform. It's a grueling 2 weeks, but so that puts you on for me, that was on the entry team. So I did out of my 30-year career, I did 16 years on the special response team.
No kidding.
Uh,
16 years. That's a
16. Now
long
that,
time.
yeah, it is. Now that is in addition to my normal duties. So like, that's not a full-time team. So we were a part-time team, and we would basically train once a month for that. And each month was something different. So we would train on firearms. We would do different entries. We would do different, like a search for a lost person. So a lot of different things. Now they train actually once a week. And
Was there ever a time when you actually had to use that training in a real scenario?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was on different scenarios where we actually had like barricaded subjects.
Yeah,
We had one where we used a combination of different things. So I was trained, in addition to being on that team, I was trained in how to use different gas projectiles. So you had to go through another week's school. So every time you went through, like say room entry, or you were to get certified in using gas or like pepper spray or anything like that, you had to go through these different modules from different organizations to get trained to be able to use those tools.
sure.
So yeah, there was a lot of times we had barricade situations where we would use like a wood search, and we'd work our way through this wooded area to get up to the house, and then had snipers set out, so like we'd have to communicate there, and they'd have to know our direction of travel. So yeah, it was
Man.
like, I could go on
And
for.
those are not really typical patrol duties.
No,
You don't
there's
experience that
so
during
like
your shift.
I could work a shift, I could work a midnight shift or 4 to 12 shift, whatever I was doing. And then I come home and I get in bed or take a nap. And the next thing you know, my pager, for those who don't know, we had pagers, and
Yeah,
they
you
would
may
go
want to
off.
clarify what a pager is. It's that
Yeah.
small device
So it's a
that
small
beeps your
device, like
egg.
half the size of like half the size of a phone. And on the top, there would be a cell phone number, or a number that you would call, and that supervisor would say, "Hey, we have a barricade situation at such and such, and you're to meet at whatever." And you're verifying that you got the information. You would call that number and say to the supervisor, "Hey, I got it. I'm on my way. I'm 15 minutes out," and that would start the ball rolling. Yeah, so that was the way communicating back then. And like, if they needed you and you were out on patrol, then you would go to a payphone, because we didn't have cell phones.
Oh
And
boy.
you would go to
Not the
payphone and
payphone.
drop your quarter in, and you call the number, or you would go there and call dispatch from your radio and give them the number, and then they would connect with you. So yeah, I'm dating myself then, if people know what a payphone is.
Hey, it is what it
Um,
is.
yeah,
That's
and
the way it used to be back in
that was,
policing. Now, I
yeah,
didn't come into law enforcement during those days, of course. I actually became a cop in 2004. So we did have the capability of utilizing that radio, but hearing
yeah,
and listening to some of your stories, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. Being that you were not only a sheriff's deputy, but you had a part-time role in providing specialized
yeah,
tactics training. And
yeah,
to any of my crew listening, the police academy does quite well, I would think, especially in Maryland, training officers to deal with some of these dynamic situations. And I'll just briefly mention a few. One is
Yeah.
officer safety, right? You have to be
Mhm.
safe when being a police officer because, in the academy, I can say that I was trained like everyone is trying to take your life for a good reason. And not
Right.
that you have that mentality where you go out there and you're the aggressor, because police should never be the aggressor, of course, unless someone's bringing that hostile confrontation to you. But
Right.
I was trained under that old school philosophy that you have to be mentally prepared, you have to be physically in shape, you have to be alert. So, you being on the SWAT team, and I don't want to speak for you,
Yeah.
just really brings back a lot of those fundamental training elements that I've learned. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. And the same thing is like you're in a situation where, hey, you have to, shoot somebody, or there's a situation where you have to use deadly force. It isn't just like, okay, after a situation, okay, you go about your business. Again, there was 8 of us. We were close knit group. Again, we worked different patrol shifts. Sometimes some of us worked together, but like it was like another family. So like
Mm,
you know, our wives, we went out to dinner as a group. Sometimes we had family or group functions, like a cookout, because you were a second family.
yeah.
And, within the police family, you were a second family. If somebody needs something within that group, we would help them with it. Again, we would talk through situations, you know,
That's one of the things I've heard, Joe, especially among specialized units. You guys always train. The
right.
training aspect is huge. Just like you said before, you never know when you're going to have that life or death moment. So, hearing you say there was also another side of being in fellowship with some of the officers, going out to family events, how important is that?
Oh, it's huge because again, you're relying on that other person in a situation where it's serious. Again, with the patrol men and women, you kind of know what you're going into because you hear the call, whether it's a domestic or that. When you're going on a call out for the SWAT team, whether it's a barricade situation, hostage situation, um, you know, ahead of time that this isn't something to fool with. It's
Yeah.
like it's heightened already. So the thing with the training part is like I knew what each person was going to do in a situation. So I was usually the second person, like in the house or on the situation. So the team led usually with a person that had a ballistic shield. Now,
Okay.
again, in the beginning, we didn't have any of that. So,
Look, man, those ballistic
but
shields
right,
are heavy. I've
yeah,
tried to hold
yeah,
one for about maybe 25 seconds and my arm started to get weak, and I
right.
wasn't even a part of a tactical unit.
Right. Yeah. But I was the second person, which usually had an automatic weapon, automatic rifle. But with, we switched positions as we did our training. So that way, if you were on the shield today and I was number 2, we were one unit. So I knew how, you're going left. I know which way you're going. If you're doing this, I know you're doing that. We had 3 or 4 people that were shield people. So when we would do our training, I wouldn't necessarily be number 2 all the time, and I always trained with all the different shield people.
So
So
whichever
they
role you entered, you knew how
whatever
to
role you're in,
effectively.
right, right. So like even before you moved, I could say, okay, Javon's going to the right, or
Mhm.
Javon's taking 3 steps forward first, or he's moving this way on this particular situation. So it was like you could read each other's minds and you just did it. It was second nature. And even though the calls were of a serious nature, you knew that the other person knew what they were doing.
Sure, and
Um,
you also knew that at the end of the day, the primary objective was to go home at night,
right,
right? Go home
right,
safe
right,
the
right,
same way you came to work. So
right,
it doesn't surprise me what you're saying, but I know there's a lot of listeners out there who was wondering, what is it like being that SWAT officer and tactically being prepared? The police academy, they do a pretty fantastic job at training officers on the patrol tactics,
right,
officer safety, communication, constitutional law, learning about the legal jargon. But there's a whole nother side. If you are interested in that type of training, I would highly recommend that you
Right.
reach out to Joe Mina or myself, and I can at least give you some solid information on how to pursue it. So good
Right.
stuff. I want to
And
transit. Mhm.
let me hit one thing. And the thing with that, even on patrol, is to resolve the situation, and you try to resolve it peacefully.
Sure,
And I just want people to realize, like, hey, police officers don't go out there just to hurt people or shoot people.
that's
Like,
right.
you try to resolve it in a peaceful situation. That's the last thing you want to do, is being involved in a shooting or use of
Yeah, no
force or
one wants
whatever.
to be involved with
You,
the
you don't
shooting,
you don't you
not
don't
the
want to do
person
that.
with yeah,
Right, right. So
common sense
even with the
anyway.
tactical stuff, like, it is the last resort, but sometimes, depending on the situation, it does happen.
No, I appreciate you saying that, Joe. I want to also end the podcast by saying this. I want to correlate transition to the spiritual side of things, right? As a person of faith, you are a professing Christian. I love that about you, how God has been sovereign in your life. But when we think about, I believe it's in First Peter 5:8, how the devil, right? He comes like a roaring lion seeking to devour people, especially people of faith who want to worship the Lord, but at times we face spiritual attacks. And if you remember the initial podcast topic, I want to sort of talk about that a little bit and gain your
Mhm.
perspective. So, out of all the years, your 30 plus years of being a police officer, also a professor in criminal justice, what big takeaways can you give my listeners on the importance of relating police training to being prepared spiritually against the enemy's attack?
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I always would always personally use the fruits of the spirit,
Mm,
and also the full armor of God. Um, Again, you're talking about physically, spiritually, mentally being prepared for the job. And again, part of our job, and if you're a future police officer and you're a Christian, is to be a representative of Christ, and being prepared not only from the job side, but like you're talking about spiritually. um, there's a lot of things that come at you, whether it's, like I said, a drunk person or a situation that comes at you. If
mm,
you're not spiritually set, and you're not treating people as a child of God, again, like we said beginning, even though they do something wrong, they are still a child of God. And you're representing Christ in your words, your actions. And if you're not following the Lord daily, it's a daily walk. If you're not following the Lord, that's where the devil can come in and harden your heart on different situations or calls for
sure.
service. And
Always
it's
picking up
easy,
that cross.
right? And it's easy to get in that because, you know, again, you come out of the academy, you're raring to go. Um, After so many years of working, whether it's 5, 10, it's easy to harden your heart as far as the different situations,
Sure.
especially with, like domestic. Oh, another domestic, or I'm going back to Javon's house again, or the Thompson's house. It's easy to do that and not set your mind spiritually on, how am I going to help this person? This is why the Lord has me here. The Lord has me in this particular profession because I am supposed to be a helper. I am supposed to be a light of the world, and
Mhm.
not another person that's part of the problem in the
Yeah.
world.
It's a
You know,
calling, right? It's a
right? It's a
calling. You
calling,
have to
right?
have this thing in your heart. You have to have a mission. I love what you're saying. Go ahead, Joe.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I talk about in class too. I try to have the students compare: is it a calling or is it a career? Is it a
Mm,
calling or just a job to you? If it's just a job to you to collect the paycheck, and I like doing this, I like, driving the car fast, and I like shooting, I like do you're in it for the wrong reason.
absolutely.
And yeah, you may go through a career, but it's not going to be a productive career, and it's not going to be productive for the kingdom of God, because you're not doing what you're called to do.
Right.
Again, there's a lot of people that are great cops and they're not Christians. It's a career or a job to them. That's kind of where, like, you're when you go into work, you don't have that enthusiasm each day that you go in. Okay, how am I going to impact the world today? And that's what I
Right.
tried to pray before I went to work: is how am I going to impact the world
Mm.
today? How am I going to impact people at work? How am I going to impact the community? How am I going to impact myself by how I'm carrying myself?
Amen,
Um,
brother.
so
Yeah,
you have
if
to
you're doing
be
this job just because of the money, the benefits, you're in it for the wrong reasons. Do
right,
not become a sheriff's deputy or a
right,
police officer.
right,
Go work somewhere else because
right,
eventually you're going to wear yourself thin. You
right,
have to do this job because you genuinely want to make an impact and a difference in people's lives. That's
right,
one of the things I try to stress a lot to my students. You have to love your profession because it's going to stretch you thin and challenge you whether you like
right,
it or not.
right. And it's a daily thing, and you're going to have days where you're going to say, I really don't feel like going into work today.
Yeah.
But I always kind of like, okay, what if the Lord said, well, don't really feel like creating animals today, or I really don't
Mm,
feel like like you kind of think, not the thing, what would Jesus do, but like, again, a daily thing is, what if the Lord said, well, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to
mm.
provide this, so you just kind of remind yourself, as like I'm here for a reason. This, like you said, this is my calling. Um, I'm called to do this, then I need to be there in good times and the bad times. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, Joe, man, I could not agree with you more. I guess my final question would be, looking back over your 30-year career of being a sheriff's deputy, fast forward to 2023, if you can do it all over again, if you can go back to day one, would
Yeah.
you still want to serve in law enforcement?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I look back at my career and I was like, again, good times, bad times, built a lot of, friendships, relationships, uh, with Christian brothers and sisters, with men and women that I work with community people. Um, Yeah, I would. Like, in the current circumstances, I don't I'm glad I got out when I did. Um, Again, just with all different things going on in society today. But yeah, I wouldn't the 30 years, I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And it was, again, teaching has allowed me to use, the gifts that God gave me, and what I went through and different things in the class that I'm able to share with them. Hopefully they're those students that are wanting to go in that career. And again, I don't have every student in class like you wants to be a police officer. It could be
Mhm.
corrections, it could be a civilian job.
Yeah, criminal justice is huge. It's
Criminal
not just
covers
limited to police. You
right,
have
right,
courts and corrections too. Yep.
right, right. But like the class I do is very interactive. It's probably, about 75% interactive, where we're doing motor vehicle stops, where we're doing interviewing, we're doing different things that would be in a police academy, and having those conversations. And the students will ask me questions, but I will try to make them problem solve on their own, which helps as they get into the academy or they get into that. And again, if they become an attorney, some of the things we do is a learning lesson too, because when a police officer comes in and testify, if they're a defense attorney, they
Mhm.
kind of know what the interactions are. Oh, that's why they're doing this. So,
Yeah,
yeah, the
defense
students will love
attorneys,
it.
they study police tactics as well. They
Right,
read up on
right.
it to try to, counter our argument. So that's understood. That's a
Yeah,
part of the criminal justice
yeah,
system.
yeah.
So yeah, I also want to say I appreciate you very much, Joe. I can go on for the next 3 hours. I love having these organic conversations with
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
brother. You've really opened up a lot. You unpacked a lot about the world of policing and spirituality, how it relates to the Christian personnel. I mean, this is absolutely phenomenal. I appreciate you being on the show. Do you have any last parting thoughts for my crew?
No, I would just say again, it's a calling. If God's tugging at your shoulder to do this, I would definitely look into it. We would love to have you at LBC, as part of our criminal justice family. And yeah, any help that I could be, just let us know.
Well, with that, Joe, I really appreciate the time on the Dr. J Talks podcast. And to my listening crew, you can please follow me at hashtag Dr. J Talks. Until the next episode, take care and God bless. We are rocking out. You are listening to the Dr. J Talks podcast.